Sari Mitnick, and this is Seamwork Radio, where we tell stories about the surprising ways that sewing impacts our lives. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio. So this month we've been talking all about fitting, and we started out by discussing what impacts our feeling about clothing and garment fit has on us. And then last week we dove into how to jumpstart your own fitting journey. Today we're going to be talking about our own favorite fit resources. So we have a lot of tips and resources here for you guys if you want to explore this topic even more. So we're going to cover some favorite books, and we're going to talk about how to look for resources within the sewing community itself. I'm really excited to talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've both been doing this for long enough that we have our definite favorite go-to things, and we'll give you the little insider scoop. So, Sari, I'm really curious to know, what is the most life-changing fit adjustment that you learned?
Well, I talked about this in our episode a couple weeks ago, that I have a pretty short torso, and that was sort of the first real fit adjustment that I experimented with and learned for myself, was just shortening the bodice on things. And that is still my go-to. If I'm making anything has any kind of fitted bodice or fitted waist, I know that I'll probably need to raise it up a little bit. And that's still, it makes it's such a simple adjustment. It's just removing length, but it makes a huge, huge difference in the way things fit on my body. So that's probably my biggest life-changing fit adjustment. And it's a really simple one. What about you, Haley?
I would say I'm a petite, curvy person. And I think once I learned how to fit my bust, that was a really huge moment for me, is figuring out exactly how much room I needed in the bust and how much shaping I needed to then take it back in at the waist and all of that. So when I learned how to pattern make, I did all of these things as kind of separate adjustments, adding length, adding fullness, doing all of those things. And then when I learned a full bust adjustment, it's really it's a complex adjustment, but it's a singular adjustment that really addresses the need you have for a little higher armhole, a little more fullness, a little bit more length when you have a larger bust. So that really blew my mind to be able to do that adjustment in just a few slices of your scissors and a little bit of slashing and spreading. And that was my first introduction to the home sewing world's way of doing fit adjustments, which was just the nerd in me was just so tickled by, so fun to explore this whole new methodology.
Yeah. And that's a really one of the most common fit adjustments, I think, in home sewing that people make. So there's a lot of stuff out there about it. And I think that's one of the reasons that fitting can feel so overwhelming to people, is just there's so much information out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can really, people get stuck because, there's the whole analysis paralysis thing. There's just so much information. It's a complex, issue, the body. It's, there's a lot of things going on with the body and in space. So I think, it's real easy to just get lost in the weeds of all the things you could do to adjust a pattern. Don't you think?
Yeah. And just going down the Google hole of what does this wrinkle mean? What do I do? How do I adjust for my shoulders and blah, 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 blah. And then you see that there's 10 different methods and then people critiquing those methods in the comments. And you're wait, what's the right way to do it?
Yeah. Yeah. There's some debate about these things, but it's
Totally.
whatever works for you, I think.
That's what I believe. If it gets you a result that you're happy with, then I would say go for it. There's rules in pattern making for sure. I'm not here to tell you that there's not any rules, but I think that there's a point where you get so kind of hung up on these rules that you lose the plot. So I'm going to give some tips. Well, not really so much tips this week, more just recommendations for resources sprinkled with some tips. So my first tip for you is to pick a book, a reference book that is going to be the place that when you try on your muslin, this is where you're looking to help you to diagnose it and then to make the adjustment that you need. And we have some favorite books, and I'm going to share them with you. So my favorite book is the book that I learned how to pattern make with. It's called Pattern Making for Fashion Designers. It's by Helen Joseph Armstrong. My first day of fashion school, I got a copy of this book. A lot of pattern makers use this book. It's just really popular in the fashion industry. And so I think when I got it, it was like the third or the fourth edition or something. And then later on in my sewing career, I met someone who was a corset maker and a really amazing pattern drafter. And she had the first edition of this book. And the first edition has a ton of fitting information at the end of the book. So you like learn how to draft all the patterns and stuff, but then it has this fitting information really like based in like diagnosing wrinkles and the adjustments you need to make to fix those things. It's so cool. And it's very similar to the way that we approached the How to Fit with Confidence class. And so if you want a really in-depth version of that, I recommend this book. It's a textbook. It's out of print. It's not super cheap. But if this is something you're really invested in, I recommend it.
And so would you recommend that people look for the first edition?
The first edition to me is like the best. And that's the one that has all of that fitting information. So if you can get your hands on it, to me, it's like the holy grail of fitting. I hope I don't like drive up the Amazon prices on it. Go quick. I think another wildly popular option that's more home sewing geared is anything in the Palmer Pletch universe. Of course, the Palmer Pletch Complete Guide to Fitting is amazing. What they specialize in is tissue fitting. So if I'm not saying that you should never sew a muslin, but if you want to avoid more muslins, tissue fitting might be for you, because what you do is utilize the pattern tissue, pin that together, and then try it on. So it can be really life-changing. And once you master it, it can really speed up your fitting process. Mm-hmm. They also have a bunch of more specific books about like pants fitting. It's like pants fitting for real people, knits for real people. It's really great. They always do an amazing job of like picking models that have very realistic body types and like really going into diagnosing all of those things and sorting out the adjustments.
Yeah. And Patty and Marta have been doing this for a really long time, and they are just experts on this particular method of fitting. They teach classes on it. They've got, all these books that Haley mentioned. It's really worth looking into. I think when my grandmother taught me to sew, the first thing that she made for me was my prom dress when I was 16, and she did tissue fitting with that. So that's how I learned how to kind of start fitting, is with the tissue like that. So I think it's a nice addition. Even if you're going to make a muslin, it's a nice addition to your repertoire.
Yeah, totally. And to get like kind of the bare bones of the fit, the length, the like overall ease before you jump in and make a muslin, make some kind of preliminary adjustments first. Another one that is highly recommended, I think this is a favorite amongst Meg, our editorial director, and also Taylor, is Fast Fit. And that's by Sandra Betsina. And so this one is really beginner friendly. It's really step-by-step. It has full diagrams and kind of bullet points. And so it's really good one if you are new to fitting and you really want it brought down to the basics. So if this is like a whole new thing for you, I think that fast fitting is a good option. Whereas like pattern making for fashion designers would be like, if you maybe have some good fundamentals of like, not so much pattern making, but like understanding of patterns, and you really want to deep dive and invest the time and money in it. Another author that we're just like huge fans of here at Seamwork is Kenneth King. His book, Smart Fitting Solutions, is totally essential. If you're more curious about tailoring or more like traditional approaches to fitting, Kenneth King is a great resource. And he's just like a truly spectacular sewing. He's a good teacher and a great sewer. So we always recommend anything by him.
Yeah, he's awesome. All of these people are awesome. I really like Sandra Betzina's work too. I think she does a great job of making things really, really user friendly.
Yeah, totally. This is the part of the episode where we just gush over people that we love in the sewing community. They're all so great.
They're all amazing.
And that kind of like leads us into our next tip, which is in addition to these kind of trusted authors and books, the sewing community is amazing. And if you're struggling with something, then there might be someone out there who's, having the same thing. So reaching out to sewing friends is a really good resource that's right there at your fingertips. If you're working with a specific pattern, lots of times the pattern maker themselves will have some resources that you can use on their website or blog. Some people are still blogging, and you might find a sew along or some other resource that's going to help you kind of wade through those adjustments. A lot of times I see people putting adjustments on their Instagram, in their stories and things like that. So definitely check it out. I think that there's this you're not the only person sewing this pattern, and you're probably not the only person who is doing that particular adjustment. So get specific with your Google search, name of the pattern, name of the pattern maker, type of adjustment you're looking for, and check it out because there might be some great resources for you. We also love the Seamwork community. We talk about it, I think, every episode. But it's a private community for Seamwork members, and people all the time are on there posting pictures of their muslin. And we go on every day and we answer questions that go unanswered. But lots of times, other sewers beat us to it. And we're like, oh, yeah, well, that's what I would tell them to do. So high five you. Good job. But it's a great resource to get some feedback and opinions on kind of where to go.
Yeah. It's a great mix of kind of crowdsourced information and hearing from the actual pattern makers and people who are involved in the process of creating the pattern. So it's a really wonderful way to get some helpful tips, advice, get pointed in a direction, get some things to try. It's just a really wonderful, positive, and supportive place.
Yeah, totally. A big thing for us here at Seamwork is you're not in this alone. We're here to help you find your people and create a community so that sewing isn't this thing you do in a dark corner of your house all by yourself. It's this wonderful kind of community experience. And the Seamwork community really does a good job of bringing that to life. And while we're shamelessly self-promoting, the last two things that I'm going to recommend are our brand new class, How to Fit with Confidence, taught by me. You can check that out in the Seamwork classroom. It offers a really good framework for how to approach fitting. So if you're just starting out, I definitely recommend that. And then in addition to that, which works as a really great companion, is our Seamwork Fitting Journal. And if you download that, you'll get a 5-part series called Jumpstart Your Fitting via email. And that will kind of walk you through a really great framework for approaching your fitting that will help you kind of work through that journal and those worksheets that are contained within it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are so many resources out there, but just having a journal and a place where you can write down your own thoughts, your own experiences with fitting is really, really valuable. We talked about that a lot in the last episode, but I just wanted to emphasize that because I think it's so helpful. And you don't need necessarily our journal to do that. I think it's got some really, really helpful pointers and frameworks for you. But just doing this generally, I think, is extremely, extremely helpful.
Just the practice of taking pictures and notes so you can notice those patterns is going to be really remove a lot of obstacles for you long term.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm just going to quickly recap and tell you a little bit, kind of recap the 5 resources that we mentioned in some of these books. So the 5 resources that we talked about are 1, books, and I'll go over some of those books that we mentioned specifically, and we'll put links to those in the show notes as well. The second one is looking at Pattern Maker's own resources and seeing what they have produced to help you through fitting their patterns. A community, especially the Seamwork community, can be a great place to get help. So you can post pics of your muslin and get advice there, both from us and from the community as a whole. A really great place to look for help with your fitting. Our new class is called How to Fit with Confidence. And if you're a Seamwork member, you can take that class with Haley and learn some of these fundamentals of fitting to really get you to a point where you feel comfortable with fitting. And then lastly, we have the fitting journal, which is free for anyone. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And you'll get a 5-part email series with that to kind of walk you through how to use that journal. And those are our kind of 5 categories of resources. I wanted to dig into those books that we mentioned a little bit. We mentioned Pattern Making for Fashion Design by Helen Joseph Armstrong. Haley recommends the first edition of this book if you can find it. The Palmer Pletch Complete Guide to Fitting, or any book on fitting from Palmer and Pletch, if you're interested in the tissue fitting method. Fast Fit from Sandra Betzina, and this is more of a beginner-friendly book, so kind of going over the basics of fitting and doing so in a way that I think will make a lot of sense if you're new to it. I think she's great at breaking those things down. Kenneth King's Smart Fitting Solutions. We're big fans of Kenneth King, and I think this is a great book if you're really interested in digging into some more traditional approaches to fitting. He's amazing. So those are some of the books we mentioned. Again, we'll put links to those in the show notes and to all the free resources and to our class, so you have access to all of those things. And if you want to discuss fitting more, don't forget to join in the conversation about fitting that's going on over on the Seamwork community as well. We talk a lot about fitting over there, and not just fitting, not just, the tactical parts of it, but some of the bigger issues around it, which I think is one of the most amazing things about the community. We really get into some in-depth discussions over there. So we'd love to see you over there. And if you liked this episode, be sure to leave us a review. We would love to hear from you. Leaving us a review really helps other people to find the show. And so we very, very much appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who's already left us a review. We love it. We love reading those reviews.
We do.
And yeah, it's so fun to see all the comments and the nice things that people say. Really gives you the sense of this podcast being part of the Seamwork community as a whole, and that we get to talk to you every week is such a privilege. So thank you guys so much. And that wraps us up for the week. We'll see you again next week on Seamwork Radio. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the Seamwork community, and you can find us at seamwork.com. If you have a story to share, send us an email at podcast@seamwork.com. We'd especially love to hear stories from those whose experiences often get left out of the conversation, whether because of race, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, age, or any other reason. Again, that's podcast@seamwork.com. You can find us on Instagram at Seamwork and Seamwork Video on YouTube. We'd love to invite you to join us at seamwork.com. We have an amazing community there, as well as new sewing patterns and classes each month for members. Podcast listeners can get 50% off our unlimited membership, which gets you unlimited downloads from our library of over 150 wardrobe-building sewing patterns. Just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find that link in the show notes. And if you like this podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice. It really helps other people to find the show so they can hear these stories too. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with you soon. I'm Sari Mitnick, and this is Seamwork Radio.